Thank you very much, Professor, for your time here on ENCA. Now, let's start with the public spat between the minister, Lindiwe Sisulu, and the president. The president having come out to say she apologized, but obviously she came out with a different story. So really, this shows that she really is probably going for that leadership position in December.
Yes, I think that is how most of us interpret it. She tries to position herself clearly now to be in a leading position as the opposing candidate of President Ramaphosa. She also positions herself more on the left. Some would say that therefore she is sort of representative of the Zuma supporters or the RET supporters or those persons who simply don't support President Ramaphosa. She focused on some aspects which are sort of typical of the left, as well as typical of the arguments that President Zuma used in his public statements just before the Constitutional Court judgment last year, when he was convicted and sentenced to prison. It also focused on the judiciary. It also focused on some judges and was exceptionally critical about it. So she, in a sense, therefore, doesn't present new arguments or new views. It's rather sort of reinforcing some of the views already stated by President Zuma.
But is this going to help her at all in her quest to become president or part of the top six of the ruling party? Is it going to help her, to come out against your political principle?
Well, I think what is not always appreciated is that the position of the president, irrespective who is the incumbent, is an absolutely powerful position within the ANC and national government. And the combination of those two means that it cannot be contested, really. It is not a level playing field between the incumbent president and a person who wants to contest that. That is why we haven't seen up to now that a president served only for one term, except for President Mandela, who chose to do that. The institutional power of a president, and especially the ANC's president, but also the national president, is just so much that an ordinary minister, and we have to remind ourselves that all ministers in the cabinet are appointed by the president, and he can remove the members of cabinet at any time. So that it reinforces this inequality when it comes to a type of a power struggle that might emerge between her and President Ramaphosa. So I would say if she wants to put it now already on the table and not wait for the elective conference, the national conference in December, and tries to upend him and in order to try to weaken him, then I don't think it's going to be very successful. If she tries to mobilize support from her supporting side, from her supporters, that might be a different story. I think the fact that the current situation has created controversy about who is right and who's wrong, and who is therefore is the credible one and not, and that there seems to be contradictions in her own statements, that I think will undermine her in the short term. What will be the case in 10 months' time, we don't know.
And I mean, it's not going to be an easy landslide, I assume, for the president as well, because, regional conferences are expected to take place. And here in Gauteng, we heard last week at a funeral service of an ANC leader from the suspended Secretary General, Ace Magashule, that about 4 out of 500 or 100 regions in Gauteng are actually operating properly. And that would mean maybe it's not going to be a landslide for him, especially looking at the fact that Gauteng is that province that is seen to be supporting the president.
Yes, the branches are not in a good position at the moment. And first of all, the branches will have to have their meetings. They will ultimately have to identify their delegates. That often has become a controversial process because there's gatekeeping. There's the fact that branches didn't have their AGMs. They don't have all the procedures in place in order to do that elections. Then follow the provincial conferences. And in 4 provinces at the moment, they don't have provincial leadership. In the Western Cape, in the Free State Northwest, as well as in Mpumalanga, they haven't elected all their members. So, and incidentally, most of them are those provinces that were seen in the past as opponents of President Ramaphosa, or at least not supporting him openly. So it's going to be a question also of which of the provinces are best prepared, and which of them therefore will either be in support of President Ramaphosa or of any of his opponents. The problem with the opponents are that at the moment it is very unclear. There's actually a vacuum about who are the possible opponents, except for Minister Sisulu now. But other names were mentioned, but none of them were actually very prominent persons. And I think that's the real dilemma for the RET group or the opponents of President Ramaphosa. They are disorganized. There's not really a movement or an organization which can support such a campaign. And I think this is one of the weaknesses for them, and strengthens the position of President Ramaphosa. He, as I understand it, already appointed his team, his campaign managers for his campaign.
And Professor, let's talk about this visit this weekend happening between AbaThembu King Dalindyebo and the former president Jacob Zuma. Should the current president Cyril Ramaphosa and anyone in his camp be bothered by this visit at all?
I think the king has become quite a controversial person. If we looked at the last decade or so, in the 2000s, where he was imprisoned in 2015, where he called on President Zuma then in order to provide him with presidential pardon. That didn't happen. He was imprisoned in the end for 4 years until 2019, and then was released during the time of President Ramaphosa. In 2013, the DA approached him, recruited him as a member for the 2014 election. That didn't make much of an impact on their support base in the Eastern Cape. And then the EFF before the local government election, and after that also went to him, tried to get his support for the EFF. They gave him even or donated a car for him. But that didn't change the position of the EFF. The ANC still dominated in the areas under his authority. So it doesn't appear as if he has the political impact that can really change the power relations or the balance of power, if you want to use that word, in the Eastern Cape, and especially in the area where he is as his authority. So I don't think this is going to have a major impact on the political landscape in general.
And I mean, Prof, looking at what you've said about the King Dalindyebo, I mean, you're quite right. He's been at so many political homes pledging his support. I'd describe him as a chameleon, really. And also, you know, you're looking at the fact that so many politicians, even the UDM, if I remember correctly, last year when President Jacob Zuma's daughter tweeted that this would be a lovely year for her and her father, he tweeted saying, you know, look, the king, the AbaThembu King is willing to come visit you. So again, there's interest also from a party like the UDM on King Dalindyebo.
Yes, that is indeed so. And that is because the UDM is obviously best established in the Eastern Cape. And in the General Unisa, you know, being a former leader of the Transkei, that is very much his power base. So they want certainly to have as much support as possible in the Eastern Cape. And the traditional leaders and the kings there are key persons. I think the question is to what extent are they having a political authority of their own still? To what extent, for example, will a person like, let's say, Gwede Mtashe, who also comes from the Eastern Cape, who is at the moment the national chairperson of the ANC, will have more of an impact on campaigning than, let's say, the king. And I think this is why there is some tension between the ANC and the traditional leaders, because it's a question of who actually exercises the real authority, even when it comes to political matters. And I think the currently King Dalindyebo is not in a very strong position, given also his history, as I mentioned and you referred to also, that he is not as solid as his father, King Sabatu Dalindyebo, who was regarded as one of the veterans of the ANC in that area.
Just very quickly, Professor Kotze, I don't know, do you make anything of the fact that the former president is always getting these visits from different political parties, the EFF also, UDM, etc., and now even King Dalindyebo? Do you make anything of it, or is it just because the media is reporting on all the people visiting his Nkandla homestead that it makes news?
Well, I think each of these persons you mentioned might have different reasons why they go there, the different motivations for it, and they obviously want to have media exposure to be associated with President Zuma. I think all of them regard President Zuma still as a political factor, as a person with political influence, and that they hope that their association with President Zuma can give them also some political benefits ultimately. We've seen that did not necessarily materialize like that. President Zuma appears to be, from an outside perspective, not to have that same influence anymore as in the past, and he cannot anymore direct sort of the way in which decisions or the tendencies within the ANC develop. And I think that is where there are sometimes miscalculations about what actually is the role of President Zuma. He is, for many people, a symbol of resistance against President Ramaphosa, as well as presenting to some extent the views of the left. He himself in 2000 at Polokwane in 2007, he did it, and it was successful in that respect in order to be elected as ANC president. Although when he became president, he did not implement those views. So the question is whether he is, in terms of substance, actually a person with sort of leftist associations. And I think the reason why the EFF and others are going there is possibly to galvanize this association and to try to associate themselves with it more in the public eye also.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Professor. This is obviously going to be a very interesting year for the ruling party. That was Professor Dirk Kotze, a political analyst from Unisa.